overall global inflation rate. And so they could borrow money in Japan for zero, invest it in gold, and pocket the difference. And it was very profitable. And all you needed was a cooperative banker. That was called the yen gold carry trade. Very popular through the 90s. It was an easy way to make sure money. And because whenever sure money is available, people tend to climb on board and do more of that kind of investing, and then it becomes leveraged and so on and so forth. The problem we have strategically now is that there are enough countries in the world with essentially free money that we are not likely to see a dollar gold carry trade develop. And we've got the problem that the Fed was very clear. If you read their statement, they've just about removed references to inflation worries, even though we've essentially printed up $8.2 trillion to try and stop the bleeding and the bailout. So having printed up all this money, you would expect from a purely Austrian school perspective that we ought to have screaming inflation going on around the country. And in fact, we don't. And the reason we don't is a phenomenon called the velocity of money. Money, you can print up all you want if it doesn't go anywhere. And much of the bailout money hasn't really gone anywhere. It hasn't gone into consumer pockets. It's essentially sitting in bank vaults and on bank bottom lines as banks try to figure out how to make a buck. And consumers are pulling in their horns. I'm sure you've read how the Christmas sales are terrible. I put up on my website last week how container shipments coming in on the West Coast are down year on year for some of the big ports like Los Angeles, down almost 11%. The global problem that we face is that we have a kind of economics that depends on growth. And absent growth, the economy collapses. And when we see demand for foreign goods falling by 11%, Detroit's automakers on the ropes, you can get a new Hummer H3 for something like $10,000 off. When you see signs like that, you have to wonder to yourself, what is ahead? And that's a question I ask every morning on Urban Survival. It's how do we get ourselves out of this box? What's the new product that's going to get people spending again? What's the new human activity that has some real payoff, some value to it that people will pay a little bit of money for and which will improve everybody's lot in life? What's the new breakthrough in agriculture so we can all grow our own food or have all kinds of free time? Those are ugly questions. Now, have you both dozed off?
No. Oh, very interesting.
Yeah, I mean, it really is. Is that, Elena, was that you?
No, that was Nancy.
I have a terrible time telling your voices apart because I have a cheap phone, which was made in China, and I bought it for $8, and I ain't too proud to admit it. But yeah, it's a terrible problem. It's the most complex issue facing the whole of humanity. Cliff and I talk about it all the time because he does the predictive linguistics, and I'm sort of downrange watching the paper fall out on the financial side. It's his project, but he's been, generous enough to let me look into the future, both in the reports and a little beyond the reports. And from an economic standpoint, if people aren't spending money.
Well, let's leave it at that. If people aren't spending money, and let's take a break.
Oh, okay.
All right.
Sounds like a winner.
Yeah. And then we'll find out what happens with George Ure on Beyond the Ordinary.
We are back on Beyond the Ordinary with George Ure. urbansurvival.com and peoplenomics.com. So what happens when...
Oh, let's do one other thing to remind people. You can get a book on George's site that is How to Live on $10,000 or Less. It's that, talk about a stocking stuffer. It should be a main thing.
Stuffer. Yeah, and you can download it. I mean, if it's $10, buy it with PayPal and download it. But it's really interesting. I had a guy who is both a doctor and an MBA, and he ordered it just out of curiosity, and he said, "Unbelievable," because it completely changed my outlook on stuff. And I don't mind talking about the core concepts inside that little book because they're really, really important. It boils down to, as a human being, if you step back for just a couple of minutes, you don't really need that much to survive. All you need is a little bit of clothing, a roof over your head, some place to perform your daily ablutions, and a little bit of food. And beyond that, what is it folks really need? I mean, do you need to work to support a Lexus? I don't think so. I mean, nice cars, don't get me wrong. I'd love to have a Lexus. But am I going to work an extra 500 hours a year so I can drive a Lexus instead of a beat-up Daewoo? Not no, but hell no. Why would I? And so it's about taking a systems view of your life, stepping back far enough so you can say, what are the essentials that I need or that I want as a human being? At some point, odds are fairly good that each and every one of us is going to die. And we're not going to be able to die and take the Lexus or the Porsche or the 8,500 square foot McMansion or the new RV or any of that stuff with us. What we get to take with us is the memories, because that's once memories and ideas are inside your head, ain't nobody can take them away from you. And that's why, given a choice between spending money on travel or new experiences, and whether experiences are, taking a learn to fly an airplane lesson for an hour. Most people have never done that, but for like under $100, almost any airport, any small general aviation airport in America, you can go out and buy yourself an introduction to flying and learn how to fly an airplane. You won't be an expert pilot, but you'll at least get your hands on the controls and get the feeling of it. And so I've got this philosophy that says life is this big experiential smorgasbord. And why you'd want to get hung up on one thing at the smorgasbord, I mean, if you want to be hung up at the dessert table and have a Lexus and get into car racing or whatever, that's fine. But you at least owe it to yourself to jump out of an airplane and scuba dive and fly an airplane and race a motorcycle and climb a significant mountain of some kind in your lifetime. Try to learn a foreign language, go to at least, 10 new places per year, read 10 books a year that are totally new topics to you that you've never researched before. And a lot of that stuff just doesn't take much money. You can have an incredibly interesting life once you break through the idea that I don't have to have a McMansion. I don't have to live in a big city. I don't have to do all these things that I guess I'd consider programmed. And so it's all about how to break yourself out of a programmed existence and start becoming more self-directed. And so, frankly, a book that does that, and then as an afterthought, that was like the first 40 or 50 pages of the book, and then the afterthought part tells you how to build anything in the world. And that only takes about 20 pages.
Yeah,
that's awesome.
That is a cool one.
Now, have you guys got a copy of it? Have you read it?
That's on my list to do this week.
Okay, let me summarize this because it's really important that people understand it. When it comes to constructing a house, for example, there are only 4 things that you do in the process of constructing a house. You measure, cut, connect, and finish. That's it. That's all construction is. Measure, cut, connect, finish. And so, like, when you're putting up siding on a house, you measure it, you cut it, you nail it, and you paint it. And that's that. You want to do plumbing? You measure the plumbing, measure out your copper tubing or your PVC. You cut it. You use glue to connect it. You figure out how to make a decent glue joint with PVC dope. And then you finish it by turning the water on. And if it holds, great. Electrical, same thing. Measure out your wire, cut it to the right size, connect it to the right places, and you finish it by throwing the breaker, and hey, guess what? The lights come on. And people have become so overwhelmed by expertness that they don't apply any common sense whatsoever. I was telling Peoplenomics subscribers and by the way, all kinds of simple stuff like that is in the how to build anything section of how to live on $10,000 a year or less. And it does not necessarily mean that you have to that you have to be without owning property to do it. You can get on a website called UnitedCountry.com. And I don't know if you've tried this, but if you're willing to live in some outside of big city places, which you might think are undesirable on the surface, you can find a place to live for $40,000 or $50,000 a year, have a couple of acres, a rural lifestyle, and what's wrong with raising your own food? But you see, nobody thinks outside the box. Nobody stops and says, well, gee, that's kind of interesting. You mean for $10 worth of seeds, I can get $500 worth of fresh fruits and vegetables? It's like, duh, of course you can.
And they taste better.
I'm sorry?
And they taste better.
Oh, they taste better. They're, you know they're organic because you raised them.
Yeah.
But seriously, how many people bitch and moan about the high cost of living